used Detroit Speed components to upgrade our '68 Camaro's front suspension and steering, but we weren't finished there. Now it's time to upgrade the rear suspension of this car, again using some parts from Detroit Speed. This time we're going to be using one of their QUADRALink kits, which replaces the Camaro's original leaf spring design with an articulating 4-link system that allows this rear axle to rotate and pivot smoothly, so it's more predictable on a racetrack. When it comes to these types of rear suspensions, I actually like to think about them backwards. I mean, a lot of times you look at the hardware involved and you think that the leaf spring or the 4-link arms are there to hold the rear end in place as the car is driving. But it's kind of actually the opposite. The rear axle and the tire are the only parts touching the roadway, and if you can imagine, yourself pushing a cart around the shop, the rear axle and wheels would be similar to your body and your feet pushing forward, and the leaf springs and the control arms would be your arms pushing the weight of the car. So there's really a lot of force that's acted upon any type of rear control arm or leaf spring. And what happens with the original Camaro's leaf springs is as soon as you start putting bigger power and a stickier tire and using that combination, those springs are designed to flex. I mean, after all, they're springs. But what happens is you get what's called spring wrap-up, where the tire sticks too well and those leaf springs flex too much, and the whole axle housing is allowed to kind of twist. And when that happens, you break traction. And when you break traction, you lose control. So the Detroit Speed QUADRALink kit solves this by providing a solid link that doesn't flex under acceleration. The foundation for this rear suspension is going to start with a Currie 9+ rear axle housing. It's brand new housing, custom fabricated, designed to fit the first generation Camaro. This was actually a Currie crate rear end, where you can just go to their website and click the parts you want. They put it together and send it to you. In our case, we ordered a bare housing because we knew we were going to weld the Detroit Speed brackets onto it. We chose the 9+ nodular center section, a 355 rear gear, and a Detroit Truetrac differential, 31 spline axles, and housing ends that are the big bearing style. The Detroit Speed QUADRALink kit requires some fabrication, and we're going to take you through that install process. Basically, you have to install the control arm mounts into the floor of the car, modify the rear spring mounts to accept the lower control arms, and then fixture up your rear axle housing and weld the brackets on to accept the coil-over spring and shock combinations and the rear panhard bar. A couple of the cool features of the QUADRALink are the adjustability. You can adjust the length of the upper and lower control arms to get your pinion angle correct in the car. Another cool thing about the QUADRALink are the swivel link ends. And these allow the whole rear suspension to swivel. And I've asked Kyle Tucker from Detroit Speed what is inside of the swivel link. And he hasn't come out and told me directly, but he assures me that they are a long-lasting bearing design that is rebuildable. So it's something that's going to be with the car for its lifetime. In our process, the first step to the install was to cut holes in the Camaro's rear passenger floor pan to accommodate the upper control arm mount pockets. These are heavy gauge steel pockets that come with the kit. They're prefabricated. All you have to do is properly position them in the car, but Detroit Speed provides a good template so you don't miss the proper location. You can use a saw or a cutoff wheel or a plasma torch or whatever means necessary to cut those holes in the Camaro floor. The next step is to secure these pockets to the Camaro floor for welding. And in our case, we used some sheet metal screws to get everything tight to the floor. But fabricator Nick found that one of the parts of the floor didn't quite fit as well as the other.
So at this point, we've already cut the holes in the floor for Detroit Speed upper link pockets. I have the passenger side screwed in because the floor meets up with the pocket pretty well. The driver's side, however, needs a little bit of metal work to get the floor to meet the pocket.
It's important to have those pockets either screwed or clamped or somehow attached securely to the floor of the car so that when you go through your plug weld operation, there's no gap between the pocket and the floor. So we used our HTP MIG 200 MIG welder to plug weld all the holes that we had drilled in these pockets around the whole perimeter to make sure that they were never going to come off. And once that was finished, Nick went back and seam welded the whole perimeter of each pocket so that we had a nice sealed weld joint between the floor and the pocket, and then he went over it with a grinder to make sure that everything looked cool. Once the control arm pockets are welded into the floor, the next step is to make some room in the Camaro's trunk floor for the panhard bar. And what that means is that Detroit Speed provides a fabricated pocket that spans the width between the Camaro's rear wheel tubs. So you again have to measure the proper area so you know where to cut. We used a plasma cutter and some other tools to cut a big hole in this Camaro's trunk floor. And then we took some time to properly grind that hole and make sure it was the right size, and then position this fabricated new pocket in the floor. And the pocket is there because as the Detroit Speed rear suspension system articulates, the upper panhard mount actually would protrude into the Camaro's trunk floor. So this provides a clearance area so that you don't have any contact points. Again, this piece gets welded in all the way around. Nick took some time to MIG weld small sections at a time so he didn't introduce a lot of heat and warping into the trunk floor or the Detroit Speed panel, but it's just a matter of taking your time and going around and making clean welds. The last modification to the Camaro's body is the addition of the upper panhard rod mount with welds right next to the frame rail on the passenger side of the car.